Since the time I'm recording with Rajeev Nanda, there's been a couple of updates I want to pass along. One, Unlearn has raised even more funding since we spoke, which is pretty incredible. Rajeev's role has evolved, and now he's part of the executive team and responsible for all the tech org. Also, the European Medicines Agency, the EMA, has reviewed Unlearn's AI models, and that has been completed now with favorable opinion. Now onto the show. On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Rajeev Nanda. He is the Director of Engineering Operations at Unlearn.ai. We're going to be talking about career growth and career exploration when it comes to the point in which most people have to decide between a technical or people management track. And Rajeev has spent a lot of time in this area. I know he's actually an author and written about the subject, and excited to have him on to share his thoughts. Rajeev, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Amir. Well, thanks for inviting me on the show.
Absolutely. All right. Two things before we kick off. One is I'd like to know what Unlearn AI does so the audience is familiar with that. And then also after that, tell us what your responsibilities are as the Director of Engineering Operations.
Sure. So Unlearn AI was started by three scientists, turned entrepreneurs. And they had a very noble vision. They wanted to combine AI with some novel statistical, methods that enable small and efficient clinical trials. So as of today, clinical trials can take years and years, but using the methods that they had developed along with the AI models, we can reduce the time to develop new drugs and reduce the cost drastically. And recently, the EMA reviewed our AI models, and they, gave a opinion on that, which is fantastic. And we closed Series B funding, and we are hiring and growing, obviously, as a new startup on the town. And my role within this organization is to manage a few things. One is their infrastructure, which is cloud-based and primarily cloud-based. I also manage the PMO, to manage all the technical project program management and some IT operations. And along with that, I also am responsible for making sure that whatever processes we have around quality assurance, compliance related to the external work that we do. So all that, it's kind of a potpourri of multiple things that enable the operations of the company.
Awesome. It sounds like you're wearing a few different hats, and it probably gives you a good insight into what the company needs. And I know the topic and what we're talking about is based around, nurturing talent, helping employees grow their skill sets, and obviously avoiding hitting any ceiling and finding paths to kind of fulfill their careers. I guess let's kind of start at the top. When you're kind of looking at the concept of nurturing talent and obviously, trying to set up the right processes in place, when you look at, talent nurturing, like what are your, I guess, the high level thoughts of the program itself? And is it established, across an organization? Do you focus it on more, at a departmental level? Kind of what are your thoughts there?
So, I will use my prior experience and learnings from Intel, because Unlearn is a fairly small company right now. But I have the opportunity of applying my learnings and experience here. So there are various ways to look at career growth or talent growth, and it varies based on primarily the size of the company and what is required for the business imperatives. So if you are a startup or a small company, or maybe a small team in a big company, and your business imperative or your USP is that you are going to provide technical services to the rest of the organization, whether you have internal customers or external customers, then you have to focus on technology, as a career. You need to grow their skills in your organization related to that. If you are more on the product side, where you are, going to deal with, the how your products and services will be launched in the market, how they would be used by the customers, and all that. There, you may have to think of a different, mix of that talent. It may be, strategic thinking. It may be visionaries. It may be design thinking. It may be, even technology per se, because you may be developing a technology, solution or a technology product. So it's not one versus the other, or it's not that, hey, I want to only grow on this path. My approach and my, coaching to all the people that I have coached over my career is that think of it holistically, what you want to achieve out of your life, or career, or, and what does fulfill you. For example, for me, it was always that I wanted to learn the breadth of a business. So when I was with Intel IT, over the course of like 20 years, I kept moving from one department to the other to learn how Intel operates, how, or IT of Intel operates. We provide solutions for supply chain, but then how does that impact sales and marketing, or vice versa? How do we talent, how do we manage and grow talent, MLD, management and leadership development. So I, when I moved into supporting HR, I learned those things. But some of my friends and peers, were very focused on technology path. So they wanted to become a super specialist in a particular domain, whether it is data science, whether it is supply chain, whether it is something else. And then, they grew on that path. So for organizations, the key thing to understand is that, talent growth has to do a lot with how you motivate, how you retain, and how you encourage them for innovation for your business imperatives. And then things will start rolling out in terms of what kind of things you want to do in terms of the programs, and the talent development programs, or these days they call it employee satisfaction and employee growth programs, employee engagement programs. And also on the other hand, it will also guide you or give you some guidance around what kind of management and leadership you want to grow, because the mindset of a pure technical manager versus a journalist manager versus a product manager will have variances, and you have to take that into account.
I guess let me ask you this question. So, I mean, a couple of things that are interesting, talking about, obviously, if you're looking at nurturing talent at a large company like Intel, you're working different areas. Did you just choose? Was that part of your, part of your, your manager, your kind of your desire to see those different areas? Was that just how they helped you kind of gain broader exposure? Because obviously, that type of experience comes in a bigger organization, like a smaller org like Unlearn.ai. That might be a little bit trickier, but was that by design, or was that just because it's a bigger company, you just moved around a lot?
So your question is that, did I do it by design
Yes.
all the moment, or was it my manager and my mentors, asking me to do it, right? So it was both. I think it was my desire that, was actually understood by my managers and mentors, and they coached me how to navigate my career. And, that's very important, to find the right mentors in the organization. And it doesn't really matter the size. Even in a startup, like as of today, we are 40 people, but even if you are a 5 or 7 people company, and I've worked with, some earlier startups, literally where I was the 5th employee. But there too, you can find, informal mentors who can actually, hear you out and support you in your journey. And that becomes very important. As the organizations grow, what happens is that the formalization of a manager and an employee relationship becomes so hardened that the open communication and the open dialogue about the desires of the employee versus the requirement of the organization how do they get aligned? And it becomes kind of a passed down direction from the top to the bottom, saying that, okay, this is where we want to go. And without pausing and thinking, if we are not listening to the employees and their aspirations, will that create dissonance in the organization? And how do we address it upfront? So, that kind of goes into a different, topic around, the manager and or mentor versus the employee relationship, and how, it is a responsibility of the manager to make sure that he or she listens to the employees and guides the employees in a certain way that not only fulfills the individual's career aspirations, but also aligns everything with the corporate imperatives. And that's a very tricky and very slippery slope, because sometimes you may see that the organization wants to go east and the employee wants to go west. And that dissonance usually is not caused by variance of synergies. It is mostly caused by how the management gives the direction to the organization and how employees perceive it. I don't know whether I answered the fully of your question, but because it kind of starts navigating into how to lead technical folks, or how to lead a technical organization.
Yeah, and it's what's I guess the question that comes to my mind is, when you're looking at, I guess, the different paths somebody can take in an organization, and obviously, they can continue down the technical path or people management path, and without the luxury of being able to see a rotation. A lot of times, I guess, people feel compelled to just kind of progress in their career towards a people path. And before, there really wasn't as well-defined technical path. But how soon in the process do people want to start identifying somebody in terms of, potentially, hey, this person could be a people manager, more than, or potentially a technical people manager, or purely staying on the technical track?
You raise a very, very good point, actually. This was something that we discovered at Intel many, many years ago, when we were growing the organization at a very rapid clip. And you're absolutely right. What happens is that, see, when you're talking about growth, there are two types of growths. Whether it's technical versus organizational or managerial growth. So in technology, fortunately or unfortunately, it is always a domain specific. Rarely you would see that there are journalists who would, say, okay, I am a bigger journalist or a better journalist today. You will see people who are focused on cloud, or focused on data, or focused on, the full stack, or things like that. But what happens is that within the organization, we struggle with, okay, now a person having a cloud experience of 5 years versus a person having a cloud experience of 10 years, how do you differentiate? And that's, the trick is that, okay, now the responsibility, rather than growing the depth, you start growing the area of responsibility of the individual. And that's how you provide some career, tiering, in terms of not just that you are a doer. That means you're not just managing the infrastructure of the cloud, but you are coming up with innovative ideas about how do we optimize it further? How do we, make maybe a user experience layer that will hide the complexities of the cloud for other users? Or how do you mentor and coach junior employees? Or how many papers do you publish? What's your industry presence out there? Conferences you go to? So essentially what happens is that in technology space, you can easily start building a career path where, as the person grows, he or she experiences much larger influence, not just inside the organization, but also outside of the organization. But that requires a lot of different kind of support from that, right? So yeah, you were going to ask a question.
Yeah, I guess when it comes to that, like when you look at somebody's career growth, when, let's say they want to proceed down the technical path, obviously, their skills are being built upon previous skills. You can start seeing the aptitude. When it comes to somebody who wants to go down the people management path, obviously you're observing those skills being developed as well. Do they have the ability? I guess a lot of times, those skills that you need to build as you want to get into management are a little bit tricky maybe to gain. And obviously, if your manager's not a stellar manager, you're not learning maybe from the best. I mean, it's a tricky thing because we don't learn or get taught how to manage essentially.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There are like thousands of books out there on management and leadership skills, but, you can read all of them. And the first one-on-one that you have with your employee will just rip it apart, And from my own personal experience, the first time I became a manager, I just fell off my face. I fell off on my face. I was a disaster being a manager. I immediately reverted back to technical track. I said, okay, I can deal with machines better than I can deal with human beings. And but I was fortunate to have good mentors and coaches, over my entire life and over my career. Some formal, some informal. And one of the things that I learned over time was that whether it is people management or technical management or leadership, there are some certain requirements and certain skills you have to build. There's no escape out of it. I grew up as a technical person, hands-on technologist, and yes, I can do good coding, or I used to do good coding. As of today, I just do good presentations, maybe. You know, but the main thing is that switch from being a technical oriented to management oriented or leadership oriented will take effort. What happens is that we on especially on the technology side, people falsely assume that just because I'm an excellent technologist, I can be an excellent manager, because all you have to do is give a technical direction to the team. But the human side is very, very different. Where you have to deal with people's aspirations, you have to align them, you have to make sure that you are seen as a supporter and not just as quote unquote commander that who just passes on the messages and the direction. So my recommendation has always been, test out both the paths. If you want to grow in, even if you want to grow in technology, let's say you want to become a principal engineer or fellow and all that, I would still recommend that early in your career, try people management with a smaller team. Maybe you become a team lead, have 2, 3 people, 5 people. That's fine, because that will expose you to, what motivates people, what energizes people, what engages people. It's not technology. No, that's yes. A technologist will get very motivated by solving technical problem, but technology in itself will not motivate people. So there's a human side to it. So you have to understand that. And the challenge is, how do you make sure that the alignment is there? Because that has always, what keeps me up at night is my team aligned to the corporate objectives? How are we putting the strategy of the bosses into the actions that will meet the results, of the corporate? Because technology in itself will never solve it. It's the people that you have to focus on. And the earlier you get the experience, the better it is. I remember, when I was telling you about, the first time I became manager, I literally failed miserably. But, the second time I took that role, it was on a weekend where, I was just passing by the office, and I was at Intel at that time. And I, just happened to go into the office because I had to pick something, or I just remember to do something in there. And I stepped into the office, this like huge hall full of machines, and nobody's in there. So I'm the only one, and a couple of other people. That silence and the hum of machines triggered a very important thought in my mind at that day. That if people are not around, there is no intel. Machines will not be able to do anything. It is people, your employees, your team members, your managers, your leaders, everybody combined who make the organization. And that thought has stuck me throughout my life. And I have been very focused on making sure that if I become a manager, or whenever I take a management role or a leadership role, I have to focus on people first. Because if I cannot align people and motivate them and energize them, then I'm not doing my job.
I guess that's really interesting. If you were to go back, just to kind of learn from your experience, because obviously, the first go around as a manager is challenging. Sitting in your first one-on-one, and how do you run it so that there's value, and you're just not listening to sob stories or just excuses. I mean, those are all tricky things. I guess if you were to look back, were you prepared in terms of the skills? It just was a case of, hey, I just haven't done it, or was it a case of, you really weren't given as much depth in your skills to actually be ready to know what you're doing in that one-on-one?
Absolutely not. I was I was not ready. I thought that I already had gamed it. And that's where I think if you are good in one area, and especially technologists, we falsely assume that people management is a piece of cake. So yes, I had read a lot of books. I had read Peter Drucker. I was a big fan of that. Of his style and management principles. I read a big follower of Andy Grove. I've read his books and all that. But that's what I'm saying. Reading books will not make you a good manager. The book I wrote Rise, which is essential soft skills for career management, actually is a distillation of my experience and teachings and learnings over the decades. And the key thing I keep emphasizing in that book also is that you have to practice these skills. Soft skills are much more difficult to master than hard skills. I can read Java, programming. I can write 10 programs, and I can become much, much more efficient in much, much lesser time. Even today, after managing almost, I would say, over the span of my career, I would have managed around 2,000-3,000 people, not at once, but over the years. I cannot guarantee that I'm a very good manager. I will not fail as a manager in a particular situation because something new may crop up. I have never dealt with that before. Who knows? But that question usually doesn't arise on the technology side because there are very hard principles about how you program, the infrastructure you use, and all that. So, and and that's where one of the key thing I think the senior leadership has to focus on if you are going to move your people into management path, you have to make sure you have some kind of what you call as management and leadership development programs. And Intel was very good at that, and that's where I became much better manager because they had, at various levels, they had, what we used to call as MTP and LTP, management through people and leadership through people. So as you grew over the, ranks, then you would be, assigned to these programs and you would be given some, very important training that if you use it, you will become more skilled and more better manager or a leader. And I think that don't just read books. I would say start practicing those things that you learn from the books. That will make a difference.
It's interesting, obviously, that you had to resort to reading books and kind of gain any outside knowledge you could to kind of get to the point where you had that comfort level. I guess when you're looking at people that are under you, you're managing, and it could be the current startup you're working for. like when you're looking at those one-on-ones and you're starting to, you listen to people, you do annual reviews, you're looking at the paths that they potentially could go down. How much of like the discussion is trying to figure out as quickly or as early as you can what direction they would best be served proceeding, or is it, how much is it based on what they want to do, and you're trying to facilitate it and try to accommodate their career growths? Obviously, no one knows the future, but obviously there's a little bit of process in that.
Yes. So usually, I recommend that these discussions happen over the course of time. It's not that every one-on-one there'll be a 5-minute time set for, okay, what's the career session for the person? Because what happens is that things will unfold over time. And what I mean by unfolding is that the company has, let's say, corporate goal for 2022, and then a few things will evolve, and then suddenly you will see somebody energized about an idea or about one of the direction that you have to take, and that will expose you to the motivation and what drives the individual. So I would say have a regular conversation, but this should be kind of weaved into the rest of the discussions. It should not be that, okay, let's talk about your career now, or what do you want to be. But that should be the underlying tone of all the conversations you have with your employees, no matter when you're talking to them. And the key thing to observe is what motivates them. You as a the analogy I use very often is that think of yourself as a gardener. In your backyard, you're planting some flowers and all that, or trees, whatever. You don't go and start poking them every day, every night. You water them at a particular frequency. You observe. You need some new soil. You need this, and then you slowly mature them. Over the course of whatever months or years, depending on what you're planting. And same thing is about the organization. People will unfold with you because first of all, they have to start trusting you that you will not use that their vulnerabilities to their disadvantage. Because a lot of times I have seen, and I have personally, which is very unfortunate, I have seen people using vulnerabilities of their employees against the employees themselves, which is the worst thing you can do. So, but the employees will not show up their vulnerabilities if they don't trust you. So it has to start from you. And it has to be a very subtle, very, I would say, conscious, but very fluid discussions, conversations, and observations that will tell you how your organization should grow, whether it's an employee, whether it's all of your employees, or various combinations.
Yeah, it's obviously, I think it's understanding their motivations is core and key to being able to help them. I guess, have you come across a situation where sometimes you hear those motivations and you're like, you can easily, not easily, but you can see that the skill sets might not support the motivation, which is the hard part as the manager.
Yes, and not just once, but many times. And there was, I would say, a couple of times where I could very clearly see that the aspirations of the individual are in no way alignment to the organization. Now, when I say organization, it doesn't mean that the bigger, a bigger organization, but it may be your organization, right? So, and there again, if you have built a trust with the employees, you can have a very candid discussion. You can say, no, here I am going to support you to find you the right, role in the other organization, because that is where your interests lie. Within the bigger umbrella of the, this thing of with a different team. But unfortunately, my charter is this, and if you want to stick to my team, then So, for example, if you are managing the sales and marketing team, but somebody else is very much wanting to do technical stuff, obviously, but the thing is that this is where the trust building, the management, and leadership comes in play, because the employee should trust you to support him or her to find the right path. My attempt has always been, I've had multiple cases at Intel, where my employee would come in and say, Rajiv, I want to do this, and I would say, but our organization charter is this. So, do you want to continue to work with me, or do you want me to help you the right place where you can grow and fulfill your the desire of working on certain things? More often than not, people will come back to you and they will either say, no, I want to work with you because I like you as a manager or leader. And I understand that opportunity may not be today, but we'll figure it out. Or some people will come and say, well, I definitely want to get into that domain, so help me. And I have personally helped people move around careers, grow them into and this is where I go back to the analogy of, being a gardener. So for me, to have a fulfilling, a blooming garden is only by, making sure a rose becomes a rose, or a peach tree becomes a peach tree and not something else. And, so I think, yeah, it's tricky, but, it is very fulfilling also. I would say that, I did not expect that, people management leadership would be fulfilling. I was, very, hardcore technical person. But I've changed my mind over the decades. I think it can be as fulfilling as, solving a hard technical problem.
Absolutely. No, I think that's, super great insights, especially given, sharing some of your own experiences of, becoming a manager and having to deal with those initial, core skills that you need. And I know you mentioned your book you wrote, so we'll definitely include a link to that in the show notes as well. Thanks for being on. I enjoyed hearing your thoughts. I think, nurturing talent's tricky. It's far more art than science. So I think everyone has their own unique viewpoint. If somebody wants to follow up with you, what's a good way of getting in touch with you if they want to continue the conversation?
My website, rnanda.com, it has my email address. You can share my email address. And, people can find me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. But yeah, my website has my contact details and my LinkedIn, links. So you can, anybody can contact me there.
Okay. We'll make sure to include that website and obviously your LinkedIn so people can get in touch with you. Again, thanks for being on the podcast. That's it for this episode. We'll be back again with a different guest, different topic. Until then, I always ask for two things. One, if there's a specific topic you want me to focus on, hit me up on LinkedIn, let me know. I'll do my best to find someone to speak about it. And secondly, if you found the podcast interesting, we've been growing organically. So if people share it, and that's how it's been growing. So I'd appreciate it if you do. Until next time, goodbye.